Now that we've transitioned to working remote, a lot of the conversations have shifted to what does the future new normal look like? And as we know, there's no blueprint for this, so we're all learning together. I personally have literally had hundreds of technology leader conversations over the past few months, and a few common themes have certainly emerged. I think COVID-19 has accelerated the digital agenda for many, if not most industries. More projects, or major projects, I should say at least, are being paused or put on hold. The remote workforce is here to stay. And post-COVID, I think our workforce is going to be more virtual, collaborative, and tech savvy than it was before. And I'd probably add more discerning as well. Cloud migration efforts are in hyperdrive. I think companies are realizing that they were either on digital platforms or now on burning platforms, and cloud migrations are accelerating. And every business process is now a target for automation. And I don't think there's a better way to learn and to understand what's going on in the world today than to talk to just great leaders that are going through this at the same time. So I'm super pleased today to be joined by George Llado, the CIO of Alexion Pharmaceuticals. You know, George and I have spoken many times over the past few years, and we recently caught up on the topic of work unleashed and how Alexion, who've always been on the forefront of fighting rare diseases, have now expanded to supporting the global health crisis that we're going through and have joined the front lines helping to fight COVID. So George, welcome. First of all, many thanks for all the great work that you and Alexion are doing. First and foremost, very much appreciated. Maybe we can start with a little bit about your background, you know, what your role is today, what's your career been like, you know, how did you end up being the CIO of Alexion? And if there's anything that might surprise the audience about Alexion, maybe you could share that as well.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Paul. And before I get into it, I wanted to say a big thanks to Aaron and his team for upgrading my equipment here at home. While working at home, I always try to lower the bar to, you know, my clients and my customers and what they're using. We call it dog fooding, right? So if we're the lowest common denominator, we use it and we experience it. Now I've got this HD streaming, I've got this ring light, this lavalier. You know, Aaron, thank you so much for upgrading my life. I feel so much better. Thank you.
You look good as well, George. You look really good.
Hey, so no, thanks again, Paul. I've got this cool job at this, you know, fantastic company headquartered in Boston. It's called Alexion Pharmaceuticals. And I've been the CIO of Alexion for close to 5.5 years. And Alexion, you know, we work on ultra rare and rare diseases that devastate people's lives. And it's not just about the patient, because patients have caregivers, right? They have extended family around them. And so we see that entire ecosystem being affected by someone who has this rare disease that, you know, that has a morbidity of 5 years, right? From time of diagnosis. And I'm like so excited and proud to work for a company that seeks out patients that don't know they have this disease and they think they have something else, but they're still sick. And we find them. And when we find them, they feel much better. They have hope. They get a life. They get a job, right? With one of our diseases, it strikes the bones, right? If you've ever seen the movie Unbreakable with Samuel Jackson, that disease is the disease that we help not to cure, right? But to help thwart. And so we make bone stronger. We grow bone, and we get people running marathons and playing basketball. And being in the health and life sciences industry for the last 35 years has been fantastic. And then the other side is I'm a technologist, right? I mean, technology, the last 10, 15 years, it's it, right? And even in, you know, now in these pandemic and COVID times, you know, technology is the industry above all. So being a life science person and a technologist in play has just been fantastic to be a part of. So as you can tell, I'm just a little jazzed up. So as I mentioned, I've been here 5.5 years, and prior to Alexion, Paul, I was at a large pharmaceutical company called Merck. And Merck is another amazing company. I can't say enough goodness about it. Merck is going to be, well, Merck, when I joined Merck, the story was they chickenpox, right? We don't talk about chickenpox anymore. We don't talk about measles, mumps, rubella, right? We don't talk about polio, and we don't talk about those diseases because of a company called Merck. And everyone else is doing it now, but Merck discovered it. And to be a part of that was just a fantastic thing. In the next 20 to 30 to 50 years, we're going to start talking about cancer the way we talked about chickenpox. By the way, it's going to be because of Merck. right? And although I don't work for them anymore, you can see how proud I am of what they do for the world. But their product, Keytruda, just like many of our products, I mean, they're just changing the world, right? And again, to be a part of it, and my mom and dad wanted me to be a doctor, but I'm scared of blood, right? I can't handle it, and so I chose to take another route before high school, and so this is the second best thing, right? To be a technologist that helps enable companies that find patients or help patients' lives or help them live is exactly a place I want to be.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I really appreciate the backdrop there, and certainly the passion that you have for the industry you're in, and certainly thank you for all the great work that's going on at Alexion. Um, so, talking of technology and being a technologist, you've been on a journey at Alexion for the last 5 years, and we've talked about the strategy and guiding principles at Alexion throughout your time there. Maybe you could share a little bit about sort of spend just a couple minutes on the past and sort of bringing us to where we are today. Sort of what was the business landscape, or what is the business landscape looking like at Alexion these days, and how are you applying sort of technology to support that? Because as we all know, technology is forever changing, and as technology leaders, we're forever having to reinvent ourselves to stay relevant. And you certainly have been a great contributor to our advisory board. And so maybe you could share a little bit about what your relationship is like with Box as well.
No, absolutely. We consider Box a best athlete, and in about 5 minutes, I'll try to explain to you what I believe a best athlete is. But no, I'll take you back, Paul. So Alexion was this company that was founded in 1992, and by two co-founders, both out of Yale. And founded in New Haven, and they didn't have their first product until 2007. So as many people may not know, the discovery and development process of a drug takes years, sometimes decades, and so the co-founders didn't have a product until 2007. So revenue was zero in 2007, grew to 66 million in 2008, and about 2 billion by 2013. So the place grew from grocery stores to Walmart, like really, really quickly. And so from a technology perspective, there was never a discipline, right? Or even a time to catch, anyone's breath to say, okay, how big is this company going to be in 2015, 2020, 25? And how do we plan a technology platform and landscape that's going to anticipate the next and the future? And so when I joined in 15, the first thing I said is, well, I can't jump to the future first. There's a basic set of technology that we've got to sequester and start to build a foundation on. And that was the thinking of this thing called the best athletes. And so, I'm an East Coaster, and I'm sorry if I'm going to piss people off, the Giants or the Red Sox or anything else, but my favorite team, the New York Yankees, right? In the mid 2000s, were playing in a stadium that was it was legend. It was where Babe Ruth played, right? It was the house that Ruth built. Everyone loved it. I spent much of my youth $5 bleacher seats. There were black benches at Yankee Stadium in the 70s and the 80s. And I ate hot dogs and sauerkraut and French fries. And over the years, the Yankees were really, really, really good, right? Reggie Jackson and the crew. And so what happened in 2000, they realized that demand was more than supply, right? So this small stadium couldn't hold all the people that wanted to see this fantastic baseball team. When I went to the bleachers and I had to go to the restrooms, not everything worked all the time. The pipes were leaking, right? Some of the urinals didn't work. I had to go to the next one. And so the infrastructure was breaking and cracking. And for the 20 years that I was going there, I ate hot dogs and sauerkraut and French fries. And so if I went north to Boston, or if I went south to Philly, I would eat lobster, mac and cheese. They were now serving steak because the Phillies built a new stadium, and the Red Sox, while they didn't build a new stadium, they put in all new infrastructure and brought in new restaurateurs. And so when I walked into Alexion, I walked into Old Yankee Stadium, Paul. right? And so that's exactly what I walked into. And I heard all of this demand from executives that said, we need this, we need that. How are we going to grow without this? I heard the infrastructure is cracking. We can't even close the company in 7 days. And you're thinking about, how we're going to find patients. And so I sort of, paused and said, I have to build new Yankee Stadium. And that's what the Yankees decided to do in mid 2000. They built new Yankee Stadium. And I've got a fantastic picture that I showed at that time that said, here are the Yankees playing an old Yankee Stadium, and here's new Yankee Stadium actually built with the seats in there. That's where we're going as we play in old Yankee Stadium. But once I'm done, we all move. And then I blow it up.
I hope just one thing to confirm, though, that you were focusing on the technology. You didn't have to fix the urinals or the leaky pipes in the restrooms or anything like that, right? I just want to confirm that. Yeah.
In some cases, yes, because 3 years after fixing the technology foundation, I ended up owning the facilities.
Oh boy, that's a whole nother story. We'll get into sauerkraut, hot dogs, and fixing facilities, or another table that conversation for future.
Exactly, that's a whole other one. So we built 2016 the company. I brought in extraordinary leadership because I'm not smart enough to do this. Right. And so I brought in extraordinary leadership and they're still there and driving our technology. And the 3 to 4 of these individuals said, we've got to start banking on best athletes. And so when they started to think about building an infrastructure, it wasn't building an infrastructure under traditional. It was taking risks on companies that were emerging, right, headed towards that top, right quadrant, right? If you think about Gartner. And so we made bets on companies that were early in life, right? So they're going to go along with us, right? And they had great technology that we thought was going to last, that we wouldn't have to flip for another 7 to 10 years. We know, with our domain, right? It's every 3 weeks, right? And so that was the mentality: is let's take risks. Let's not bank on the regular. Everybody, Paul, you and I know that back in 2005, 2010, we all said we can't lose our job by going to SAP, IBM, or Microsoft, right? And so we were forced to think differently. And so this concept of best athletes that were these emerging platforms and products we bought into. So 2015, 16, I'm sitting down with Eric Yuan, and I'm talking to Eric about, why are you building this small little company called Zoom? And why is that going to be better than WebEx and Skype? And he gave me a lecture that I just totally bought into, right? And 16, I invested in Eric, right? And I came to see you guys, right? In 2016, I came to see you guys in Redwood and said, why do I want to do Box? Like this SharePoint thing, I think it's better, right? And you guys convinced me, listen, here's the future, here's where we're going, file collaboration. You guys are now my file collaboration best athlete, right? Okta, DocuSign. So we just started knocking them off in 2016 because we had this capital. And fast forward to 2020, with the pandemic hitting us, when we pivoted on March 10th, we didn't break a sweat, right? Zoom zoomed, Box boxed, right? And Okta was like, listen, I'm connecting all of you guys. DocuSign, we bought Mural in Play. And it was almost like we didn't leave, except that, we were at home, right? And so it was that. So the concept that my team bought to the company, right, relative to these best athletes, and we're going to drive a foundation and an infrastructure and serve all of the demand while we're at it, it was amazing, right? And so the second requirement there, Paul, and I'll be done and get it back to you, is, we wanted, as a technologist on the East Coast, what I saw year after year was bad snow days, right? February through February, March were never good to me. January sometimes. But, typically, 10 years ago, I'm getting calls about VPN issues, dial-up, this, that. And there were so many capacity issues when everybody goes home on the East Coast. And so I learned very, very early on, as you think about infrastructure and capacity, and this is where cloud afforded us the elasticity, because we made a big bet. As a matter of fact, my CTO, Dave Dill, made a huge bet that we were going to go to cloud in 2015, and we were done by the end of 2016. And so that elasticity that we now have, where we could, buy by the drink or buy by the slice, kind of, gives us a flexibility whether we ratchet up, which we've had to with capacity, or if there's a bad business event, we can ratchet down.
I know Dave and I completely feel, he's a great hire for you, and he's been an awesome partner of ours as well. I think philosophically we align behind what we call best athletes, best of breed, organizations that are maniacally focused on, particular sets of services that they do extremely well, and they innovate around that set of services, and that's all they do. And we as technology leaders, if we have that right architecture in place, get to bring that innovation and curate experiences for our employees, partners, suppliers, et cetera, which has been extremely, important. I think it's not, to your point, it's not just where you are, but it's also where you're going and where you don't know you're going, and you're in a position to be able to pivot and have the agility and the speed for what might be coming at you in the future. And I think I like to say, the slowest rate of change we'll ever experience is the one we're experiencing now. It's not going to change anytime soon. And certainly COVID is putting us to the test there. So maybe we could talk about that. That's a pivot, right? This shift overnight to sort of mass working from working remote. I know Alexion must have labs and things like that, which are, employees are a little bit more physically tied to the working space there. But for knowledge workers and so on, what have you started to learn in the last few months that makes you think differently today? We're talking a lot about what the future state might look like in the hybrid and more increased remote workforce and some hybrid in between. But, we agree we're going to come out of this stronger. But what are you starting to learn? And, sort of, I think the early few months were a little different than the past, maybe 2 or 3 months, as we're starting to really settle now and sort of embrace this sort of new normal somewhat.
Yeah, no, it's striking, right? And I struggle with whether we're ever going to be the same as we were, right? Yeah. We're going to come back, and we're going to recover. The question is, are we going to come back to where we were? I mean, we literally had 200 people on a floor, right? And that, when you think about that today, you kind of shiver, right, with the closeness and no social distancing. And we've already started reconfiguring facilities as many of the world has. And the interesting thing, Paul, is when we ask our employees before they saw what our new facilities would look like and what they had to do to be in our new facility, when we asked our employee base, how often do you see yourself in the office? The first reaction was 4 to 5 days. And then we said, okay, so here's what the office looks like. And, oh, by the way, you're going to need to wear a mask, and you're going to social distance, and you may not be able to be there the day you want to because there's going to be a queue based on space and number of people that need access. And then we reran the survey, and everyone went 0 to 2 days in the office. So from 4 to 5 to 0 to 2. So the mentality and the shift in our knowledge workers, I think, is starting to shift to, you know what, I think we're okay working at home as long as there are a number of conditions. One, let's get the kids back to school, right? Because if you think about the fatigue, and everyone talks about Zoom fatigue, and I keep telling everyone it's not Zoom fatigue. If we didn't have Zoom, we would have meeting fatigue. If we didn't have meeting fatigue, it'd be phone fatigue. So it's a fatigue that we have, and it's for me, it's psychological. But if we start to remove the barriers, like we're constrained by everyone being close to us, and we don't have choice to actually leave when we want because of the conditions around us. If you start to alleviate those, which they will happen, right, sooner than later, then psychologically you start to feel better, and people will say, you know what, it's actually okay working from home and doing this. And the other real interesting thing, Paul, is we're a global company. We've got probably, I'd say 50% of our employee base in the US, largely on the East Coast, and then about another maybe 30% in Europe, and then the rest spread in Japan and Latin America. And so the norm of meeting is you've got your international groups on Zoom, and then you've got your corporate group on the East Coast in a conference room with like 18 people. And there was this mentality of superiority. right, and inferiority. And the folks on the Zoom waffle and the little squares never spoke up because the superiors sitting around the table with their legs folded, just had this aura. And so this has kind of equalized the world and normalized the world, which I love. And I keep telling people, when I go back, I'm still going to open up my laptop and I want to be a waffle on the screen or a square, because I don't want to impact someone from, being safe to speak, because I'm sitting in a conference room with a bunch of folks, right, that are talking to each other.
Yeah, and I think actually what we're all experiencing in somewhat similar ways, the exact same type of situation where the equalization, leveling the playing field for sort of the platform with which we all interact on. We don't have this mix of some people in a conference room and some people, online. We're finding that the participation and the engagement of the people participating in those meetings is going way up. It's sort of it's been a really refreshing experience in that regard. We miss some of that sort of that high fidelity interaction. We get that sort of video gets us sort of maybe 80-90% there, maybe 95%, but that last 5-10% high fidelity interaction which we get from an office, we're missing right now. So at some point it's sort of how do we get back that 10%, but at the same time maintain the benefits that we're seeing. Something else ironically that sort of is happening as well is that I think that we see that these patterns in the data at Box. We've produced our data science team produced some very interesting data around the patterns of how the workday is shifting. We have people that are maybe more productive in the mornings and are choosing to get online earlier in the morning, or they're night owls and they prefer to work later in the evening. And, they might have some, right now, maybe some kid duty in the afternoon, or they have to walk the dog at 11 a.m. And so we're starting to see, people now starting to build a structure to their day that has some flexibility to it, that is more of a personal structure versus previously we were all sort of constrained to what the working day was at the office that we worked in. And there's all sorts of, research on the negative health and so on of commuting, what it can do, and so on. And so, and to me, one of the big benefits that I'm hearing and experiencing personally as well is that the give back of time, the time that we're getting back from not maybe having these commutes and so on, is really been really beneficial. And also the ability to focus more. I often ask people, if where'd you go to get work done? Not many people say the office, right? It's sort of offices tend to be more interrupt driven. And I think there's definitely value in having office space and bringing people together. It's not about that, but it's how do you leverage the office space to be for the best purpose.
Yes.
And I to your earlier point, I don't think going into the office and sitting in a meeting room and having a meeting is actually maybe the best thing. It really is to increase those high fidelity interactions. So
that's right.
So one of the other things that we spend a lot of time with a lot of our customers talking about security and risk and compliance. And I think that responding to a crisis does not mean our security threats or our compliance risks are any less pervasive than they were before. In fact, we've seen at Box, and I know many other technology leaders have reported the same thing, an uptick in COVID-19 malware attacks using bogus news articles, malicious emails. We think about sort of the bad actors taking advantage of the attack surface exploding into sort of billions of home offices or millions of home offices now. What have you seen in your environment, or what are you doing differently maybe to think about sort of security and maintaining a high bar for your employees?
Yeah, well, we've certainly seen an increase, Paul, of like 7x, right, in terms of knocks on the door. And what I didn't mention at the introduction of Alexion was that we're actually working on a COVID therapy, and we're in phase 3 and hope to have something that again will help people with this devastating disease. And because of that, there are a number of bad actors, right, nation states, that have come after pharmaceutical companies, whether they have a vaccine that they're working on or they have a therapy like ours, and they're actually looking to steal the IP. And all of us have gotten letters from the agency to be very watchful of what's going on in our environments. And one that's scary, right? Because we've, typically, Alexion is not a Pfizer, it's not a Merck, it's typically not a company that your sophisticated nation states would come after, right? We're not a Boeing, we're not, a Northrop, and so the knocks on the door we would see, but not as much as we're seeing now. The larger pharmaceutical companies have been seeing it for a while, and now I'm seeing what I saw when I was at Merck in terms of the volume, and it's scary, right? And it's so what, like as you mentioned, there's this attack surface that's now spread out with all of us working from home, and the first thing that my CISO started working on, which was a program in his portfolio, was multi-factor authentication for non-corporate devices. Because you think of, I think of my journey. I use a Lenovo corporate laptop in the office. When I started working from home, the Mac is just so much cleaner. Like there's just no way I was going to use my Lenovo. So I basically went in through Okta on my Mac, and I got to do everything. But I'm on a non-sanctioned device, and so half of our population did exactly the same thing. And the concern from our security organization, was high. And essentially, we took MFA, moved it to the front of the queue, and dropped them on all non-corporate devices. So you had to authenticate somewhere else. And again, that's prevention, but we're still seeing the knocks on the door, right? And thank God, and knock on wood, nothing to date, and none of our peers that we've heard of, but it is heightened, incredibly.
Certainly at Box, one of the things that we did early on and have continued to do over the last 6 months is accelerate a number of sort of what we would call roadmap engineering investments and product investments in and around secure remote work. We've increased our ability to protect against malware, device management. Some of the things we've recently launched in and around with Box Shield for automated classifications to prevent sensitive information leaking from your organization in an automated way, so we're not relying upon human beings, which unfortunately tend to be the source of most leakage without knowing that they're creating risk or even knowing that they've done it. They're just trying to get their work done. It's ironic. I say, people don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to be a negligent user today. They're just getting their work done. And how can we help to put in place guardrails to help prevent them from doing things that unfortunately could be negligent for the organization? So that sort of leads into sort of that next phase of sort of emerging technology. Any insights into what you see or would like to see in new tech, including from Box? We've been significantly improving search and performance and user experience, and really focusing in on the, like I say, the secure remote work aspects of what's going on. And so anything sort of you're thinking about emerging tech, and I'll touch on some other things that we're investing in as a CIO, what we're investing in for our organization in a moment as well.
So Paul, by the way, I'm loving what you guys are working on. I just, some of them I'm using, some I'm not. But so you have to convince Dave Dill to push this thing through, right?
All right, I'll connect with Dave on that.
Yeah, we have what's called a safe process, which is, it's a protocol where, we basically make sure everything that's coming in is safe, right? And it works, and it's right. And so Dave has put in a great platform to make sure that, our architecture runs and the infrastructure runs smoothly. But yeah, get him to put Shield, because I remember coming to BoxWorks 2 years ago. I forgot the center there where you guys had it. But that was where I first heard Box Shield, and I said, I want that thing, right? And let's start testing. I haven't seen it yet, right? But I'm loving the stuff you guys are working on. Annotation, I just started playing around with. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Yeah. The fact that I can now see data classification, right? I've always been a huge fan of feed, right? People actually pay attention to stuff now because I look at it. right? Not because I look at it and then tell them, but they know that I look at it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like this whole like cultural phenomenon thing that's actually come from the platform. And you guys are working on wonderful things, and continue to do it, and work with CTOs like Dave to start to think about, what's the life cycle and how do you push it through, right? Because
Yeah.
Dave's just not going to
Yeah.
drop it in and walk away.
Yeah.
He's going to make sure that thing hums.
Yeah,
But
personally, so I was going to say, I'm one of these people that I don't always know what better looks like until I experience it. And we've done a lot of things to our own platform in the last 6 months here that I'm like, I love this feature. Why didn't we have it before? It's things like collections, single point and click for shared links, and all these things that we've done at the UX level that may seem small, but incrementally they just take friction out of how we get work done. And you're like, oh boy, my life is so much better just by this one incremental feature that's been added. And our product team has been doing an amazing job of just delivering, capability after capability in the last few months here.
Really good. Really good. And please go back to your developers. One, thank them for the great work they're doing, but also tell them that I'd like to have the experience in my personal box that I'm getting now in my corporate. That UI is really cool on the corporate side. I don't have that on the personal side. So
we can make that happen.
Make that happen, please. It's a great experience. But Paul, I mean, going back to your original question in terms of emerging technology and what I'm looking for, I'm really happy with the set of best athletes that we've put in play. And right, and the question, and I've reached out to Aaron and Stuart, right, and Todd and a number of other folks. It's about the integration of the verticals. Right. And so that's been my big thing. So my constituency and client base, right, internal to Alexion is saying, I'd love to jump from Zoom into Box, right? And open up a DocuSign and then DocuSign drops and I'm back in my environment and I can collaboratively, DocuSign.
Yeah.
And so and I want to Slack right in the middle of that. Right. And so, to me, it's what's that skin that we create, right? And then the integration that you guys help create with us across those best athletes that gives us the best human experience that we could have. Because I truly believe that, there's the human experience in my domain is our competitive advantage. And when I say human experience, I mean there's a patient experience that we give, which I believe we create an infinity loop back to employee. Right. And so you got this patient and employee experience, which might be the same or not, but it has to be the best experience. And, for them to tell me, George, I got to jump from this to this to this, it gives me a headache. Right. And when I think about, what Microsoft is doing with Teams, right. By the way, I'm not going to shift to Teams. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to go shift to Teams. Right. In 2 years. I'd rather use my best athletes, right? It's been the plan, right? I've banked on them. That's my 7-year plan. And how do we get everyone to integrate, across the verticals? Yeah. And when we think about emerging technology, the sort of the gaps that I start to hear is how do I work, right? I've got folks working on new products that we're going to launch in 2023. And it's a team of 12 people. There's 2 in Japan. There's 1 in Germany. There's 1 in Zurich. There's 5 in the US and there's 1 in Latin America. How do they start to collaborate like a small team can, not just, and you can throw Slack out there and say, just go Slack them. That doesn't work. Tried it, right? They want to brainstorm. These are researchers. They want to ideate. What does a molecule look like? Turn that thing. Let me see it. Right. And so think about that experience across continents that we could create with the integration of tools like, Slack, collaboration with Box, right? Video with Zoom, and ideation with Mural. Yeah. Right. I mean, think of all these things that we can make come together rather than open that thing up. Oh, hold on. Let me grab it. That's where my head is. It isn't about new systems and platforms and spaceships that we build. It's about integration of the best athletes that we have, and let's sweat the asset.
Completely agree. And I think it's something that collectively all of the best of breed services are working together on. But I would personally like to see an acceleration of the pace with which it's going as well. I think it takes time, but it is getting better and better because the incentives are aligned to go make that happen. So hopefully we'll have a bunch of people listening to this interview here, and we'll get maybe some acceleration on that. Switching gears just a little bit, because you touched on this somewhat, and this is around culture. I spend a lot of time thinking about the culture of an organization and its sort of where it is in its sort of life cycle. Is it a born in the cloud, grown up digital, millennial type culture, or is it a company that has more of a legacy culture born in the last century and trying to transition and so on? And certainly at a time like now, more so than ever, especially just outside of COVID, the things we've got going on in the world today, whether it's the fires we've been experiencing here in Northern California in the last few weeks that have been devastating, the hurricanes that are hitting the Gulf of Mexico, and the things that are happening in our with the civil injustice and all the things that are happening there as well. I've always had a close relationship with our chief people officer and head of culture, even prior to COVID, and we're significantly more joined at the hip now than we ever were. It's not just a case of technology. Technology is an enabler to a set of outcomes you're trying to achieve, but it really is about the culture. And I think there are some companies that are very nervous. They haven't grown up in what you would call a work from home or work from anywhere style. Fortunately at Box, our ethos has always been to enable our employees to be able to work from anywhere, anytime, any place, and so on, in a secure way. But you can't speed up some of the things that just take time. You can. I've seen acceleration rolling out technology, but then you can't speed up the adoption necessarily. And right. I think I did read just recently that Alexion, I think, recently hired a chief diversity officer, I believe. That's correct. And so I'm interested to know a little bit about how you're sort of seeing the future as you sort of evolve your sort of cultural, what were cultural norms to new norms. And ironically, I was just having a conversation with someone where we were talking about the future post-COVID workforce, where today, we talk about digital transients and digital natives and so on, but we have a pre-COVID workforce, which we're all part of. And in the future, a few years from now, we're going to have the post-COVID workforce, which is, the new entrants into the workforce that never worked pre-COVID in the workplace. And it's sort of like these, if you have an environment that has, call it crappy tech or old tech, your ability to attract talent, retain talent is going to be very, very hard. Yeah. And I think in the future, if we're not offering sort of this somewhat more flexibility in the way we work, the ability to attract and retain talent could be hard as well. So culturally, chief diversity officer, what's going on there?
Oh, a lot. A heck of a lot, Paul. No, it's a lot of good change. And what's been needed, and not just Alexion, but many other companies. Hey, and before I go there, I want to talk about the organization that I sit in, which is part of this discussion, Paul. But it's really neat, right? So the typical HR organization, right, deals with people management, right, and so about 11 months ago. There was a big shift in the company where there was a decision that good science is great, and in the pharmaceutical world, science is what you depend on to be profitable, right, and help patients. And so there was a recognition that, and by the way, I wasn't part of it. Like I said, I'm not smart enough for this stuff, but there was a recognition that good science is not enough to get us, past 23 and 25. Yeah. And that it was, it's we've got to listen to our patients. We have to listen to our employees, and we've got to center ourselves on the experience that they're looking for. So if you think about the Amazons and what the Buffetts and these guys are trying to create in a life sciences space, they started to understand that they know the customer, they don't know life sciences. And so they're sort of one end of the spectrum. And so, we said to ourselves, we have to know our customer really, really well. By the way, we're in a rare disease business. That's thousands, not million. That's thousands. And so we should know them intimately, and that should be our competitive advantage. And so we restructured about 11 months ago, Paul, into this organization called the Human Experience. And so it's really cool because to the right of me is a woman. I call her my little sister. To the right of me, she runs patient advocacy. So all of the patients that are saying, we need, and this is how, they go through an advocacy organization or they come directly to us. And so her job is to sit there and just listen and understand it and advocate on behalf of those patients back to the corporation. And then on the other side, Paul, my other little sister sitting next to me runs employee experience, right? And we sit every other day, we sit and we talk, right? By definition, we get put together, whether we like it or not, like brothers and sisters. And I've got employee and patient right next to me. And the things that I've heard in the last 11 months that technology can enable, right? That they've asked for, and maybe I haven't heard because I'm not in the chair, or they haven't thought of because I've said we have this technology, right? Where we can find things, right, through AI and ML, and the sparks that have gone off simply because we're part of the same structure and we're thinking human experience. It's been phenomenal, right? And I think it's just an HBR case in the next few years, but it's something that's really cool. That's brought a culture to the company that's not just about science, right? It's about employees, patients, and how do we start to advocate, listen, and design around how you'd like it versus the arrogance of how we think we know it. And so it's been really, really cool. And as technologists, you've always thought, go to the client, listen to the client. Life sciences companies we can learn so much from you because we've never thought that way. We've always thought, get the best person from Harvard, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, the best scientist, pay him a bunch of money, and he's the smartest, and just do what he says, right? And the arrogance of that has just pissed people off, right? And so this whole new way of thinking, we think is going to take us into the future and kind of help accelerate the way the company's thinking, which is really
well. Again, accelerate ways of thinking, accelerate culture change, accelerate digital agenda. We're seeing a lot of acceleration caused by unfortunately, it's caused by a pandemic. But it is causing people to zoom out and think differently. I mentioned patterns earlier in what we've seen in sort of the flattening of the working day and the way that people are working, where they're working from. We've also seen situations where we've seen a significant increase in the usage of our platform by, say, government and telemedicine and in healthcare, because they probably were behind where they needed to be in their digital agenda. And the only way they can connect with their constituents in patients and so on now is through digital. So definitely seeing some accelerated situations there. And ironically, I was going to mention to you earlier, you talked about coming back into the office and doing that survey, and it was 5 days a week and then 1 to 2 days. Of all the companies I've spoken to and the ones that have had some form of reopening, whether that's in North America or overseas, inevitably, when it's left passive up to the employee, we're seeing somewhere in the region of maybe 5 to 15% on the very high end actually are choosing to come back into the office. And of the ones that are in the high end, they're still only coming back in maybe that 1 to 2 days a week. Now, it's early days yet, and employees are going to be more discerning, and we don't necessarily have some of the sort of the health guarantees that people will be looking for. But an early indicator is showing that our employees are more discerning and not at this point in time rushing to come back to an office space. To your point, we have great facilities at Box, and we have great environment to work in. But people have to commute there, right? And what does that look like? Can you imagine commuting on the trains in New York or in London on the underground or the subways and things like that? These are all things that organizations are having to think through. So you mentioned it. I think campuses are sort of almost designed for anti-social distancing. They're designed to bring people together in close proximity with one another. So as we think about business as unusual or the new normal, any last sort of advice, or what do you see as the future new normal, and sort of maybe how you're preparing for it? I know a lot of companies right now are sort of in the wait and see mode, and I've always been a little sort of similar myself. It's like, look, let's just wait to see what's going on. We're starting to see, people are maybe self-relocating right now. Maybe they're single or living alone, and they're going back, relocating back to where they grew up, where their parents are, where their families are, where their
Yeah.
friends are. And, we're starting to see that happen as in sort of organically shifting. And we're starting to hire people from locations where we didn't used to, that were previously, it was close to our hubs. And,
Yep.
now we're hiring people in more remote locations, remote not being sort of the wilderness of Alaska, but remote from a hub. And we're finding our access to, I'm just saying we, I mean collective we, as well, finding access to talent
Yeah.
faster than ever before.
Absolutely.
Reducing the hiring cycle, finding talent, helping with diversity as well in our hiring. Lots of positive things happening there. I think in a year from now, if we sort of things start to open back up in some similar fashion to the way they were previously, our geographic, or what you would call location composition, is actually going to organically change somewhat.
Yeah.
So just as you look forward, anything you're preparing for or studying or looking at to see how you might prepare for that?
Yeah, no, I've got wow, I could spend another hour on that, Paul. Before I head there, let me close out your earlier question on the Chief Diversity Officer. I think it's important.
Yeah.
And I wanted to address it. We did hire a Chief Diversity Officer, Uzair Kadir, who's just magnificent person. He was one of those folks that sat next to me. He was on the same team. So I got to spend a lot of time with him. Fantastic individual. You should meet him sometime. And so the rise of Uzair and that role, from my perspective, largely, folks believe that it came out of the civil unrest that we've seen in our country in the past 2 to 3 months. The fact of the matter was, Alexion, like many other companies, didn't have a forum or a channel for people of certain ethnicities, races, race, sex, etc., gender. We didn't have channels for people to safely express what they were feeling, how they were feeling, what they could do, or how the company can help them. And so we've been hearing that for quite a while. The civil unrest that we've seen recently in the country just uncorked that. And so Uzair and his role was sort of an acceleration of what we were going to do, just like COVID and digital, right? It was an acceleration of what we were going to do anyway, and we put him in play. And so what's happened in the last 2.5 months at a company like ours has been mind-blowing. All right, and we have, and I've spoken at a couple of these things. We have these forums called crucial exchanges, where people talk about where they come from. I came from the Bronx, right? My dad was middle class, right? No, I wasn't poor. I did go to the Yankees game every now and then, right? And we talk about where we came from and why we see things, why we see it. And oh, by the way, I've been stopped by the police, and it hasn't been pretty. The police officers have actually asked me if I'm the owner of my car, right? And so, so I tell people, this is why people react the way they do. Be sensitive, and let's be open. And so the role that Uzair is opened up, and the channels that he's spread throughout the company has just been phenomenal. So the culture has just really landed very, very nicely in a different place. And, partly because of our situation, but I think it would have happened slowly. So getting back to your last question. So yeah, I wanted to close that out. So getting back to your last question in terms of the future and how we see the future. Oh my gosh. It is, it's amazing the things that we're talking about, thinking through. So, start to think about where we worked. Right. And we started having that conversation. Everyone's talking about corporate nesting, right? And when you think about a consultant life, you've got a home base that's somewhere near. So, you got a home base somewhere in Illinois, and the folks in Chicago go to that home base in Illinois every now and then for training, pick stuff up if they need to, et cetera. And so this thought of no offices, corporate nesting, work out of your homes, that's something that's, starting to become very, very popular, not just with us, but I see it broadening. And then the fact that, technology makes it ubiquitous. You can work from Mars, right? And the fact that
I think Elon Musk is actually working on that, isn't he? I think
Elon's going to get us there 2 years from now. Elon's got us there, right? And so, you can truly say to yourself, I want to hire the best. and not constrain yourself by, I want to hire the best in Boston because people want to move to Boston. Or, when our headquarters was in New Haven, Connecticut, not very many people wanted to move to New Haven, Connecticut. So I saw exceptional talent that I wish would have been on my team that I couldn't get because husband or wife didn't want to move to New Haven, Connecticut from San Francisco or Austin,
Right.
Texas, right? Or Washington, DC. And so that was a struggle. Now I don't have that struggle. I can hire the best, and I'm in a level playing field with everyone else. And guess what? I think I have the best what of anybody because I save patients' lives. So my spiel when I go to college recruiting now is, Amazon, are you kidding me? Really? Like, we save lives, all right? You want to come work for us, right? And you don't have to come to Boston, right? Or New Haven or wherever. And so it's a different conversation. It's a different recruiting tool, and then it becomes a retention tool, right? So to me, the world is changing in terms of how we attract, how we retain, right? Do we need talent acquisition all sitting in one area thinking they can hire the best people for us when they're not domain experts? So these are things that technologies can help bring to bear. And the same way that we look at patients and bring in patients to doctors that have a devastating disease, I actually look at, can we find the best talent wherever it is, even if it's in Omaha, and bring it to us, right? And they don't have to move.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. Well, I think, as a sort of wrap here, I think we've touched on this, but focusing on the human element, and leading with empathy, I think is right now for sure is our collective number one priority. There's been a huge amount of stress and concern in our world today, and making sure our employees are well and taken care of, and their families are taken care of. And I always like to say the work will take care of itself as long as your employees are well and being taken care of. And I think lastly, it's key to be socially connected while we might be physically distant. We've talked a lot about not that missing that last high fidelity sort of set of interactions that we want to figure out in the future. How do we get back to some of that? And I think to your point, great leaders have open and intentional communication with our teams at this point. It's really extremely important. So I'm a big believer in the wisdom of the technology community. And with that, I'd really like to thank you, George, for sharing your perspectives, your valuable insights, the great work Alexion's doing, the great work you're doing. Been an awesome conversation. Could go on all day. Maybe we have a part 2 or something, but thanks again. And hopefully for folks that are listening in today, you'll also find some great nuggets of value in this conversation. So thank you for joining today, and be safe, everyone.
No, Paul, thank you. And just lastly, I just want to thank you and Aaron and Andrea and what all of you at Box are doing. I sent a note to Aaron in April and a number of other technology CIOs and thank them because they don't have line of sight to what they do for patients, but I do, and your products help us do what we need to do so we can save patients' lives. And we're forever grateful because, again, we didn't miss a stitch, right? Throughout these 6 months, you helped us keep running. We didn't miss a beat, and it's partly because of you and your team. So I really want to sincerely thank all of you for that.
Awesome. Thanks for that, George. Really appreciate it. Thank you.